it. Before anybody knew, was it a forgery or not? Zimmerman went public and said, I wrote this thing. Why would he do that? He wanted the Americans to know. They already knew the war was starting anyway. It was not a big propaganda thing or a thing where, you know, the Germans underhandedly, that nobody ever in his right mind would think that Mexico had the ability to take back these provinces. No, it was really to piss off the Americans and see if they would declare war.
Right.
And if I was Zimmerman and I wanted Mexico to join the war, I wouldn't send a telegraph as an invitation. I would send a proper dispatch or a diplomat to talk with Carranza.
Right.
Not just send a
But remember, you know,
telegram.
but see what yesterday I was telling you about the Enrile mission. You know, Gonzalo Enrile went to Germany to basically raise money for this new front that they were putting up with the Felix Diaz forces and Villa's forces. Felix Diaz with the Catholic Church as his backing, and Villa forces with, you know, all these soldiers that had you know, that were basically around Chihuahua and Durango and so forth, that who knows where the loyalty was. And as part of this mission, Enrile said, if you give us the money, you know, we will help you in the war. We will participate in World War I. We will even try to occupy our lost territories for you. That's what the Mexicans were offering. And so this whole thing fell apart. But then 9 months later, some idiot and you can't say anything else, some idiot administrator, Zimmerman never wrote this thing. It was a low-level bureaucrat who probably found these Enrile papers or whatever. We're like, oh, you know what, we could write that, you know. And Zimmerman signed off on it. Yeah, but there was no chance that Mexico would ever, you know, and Carranza was no idiot, you know. Mexico didn't have any way to attack the United States.
You know, the interesting thing for Mexican history, Enriles, it will be a last name that I will recall in history, but I never heard of Enriles.
Mm-hmm. Gonzalo C. Enrile. He was a colonel in the army. In the federal army, he became the money man for Orozco. So he was his financial man, and his connections were with the Terrazas family. So Orozco was mostly financed by money from Luis Terrazas, and so Enrile was the man that made those connections. He was a very important guy for a while.
Kind of a dark passage of the history because there is no connection. What we read in history books it's very, very small part of what it really happened.
Mm-hmm.
Because I remember in high school, I had teachers that were like communists, you know, especially the guy from history.
Yeah.
He will say, close your books and let me tell you stories, especially from the tragic 10 days of the uprising.
Yeah.
You know, the shutting down the uprising. That he told us a lot of things that were not in the book.
Yeah.
That will deteriorate the image that we had from our supposed heroes.
Well, have you ever heard that Pancho Villa and Felix Diaz had an alliance?
No.
Never.
What?
There's not a single book in the historiography that says that Pancho Villa and Felix Diaz had an alliance. And yet it is true. The archival documents are there. Friedrich Katz looked at the Gonzalo Enrile mission and he discarded it because Enrile was not received by the German government until like May or June of 1916, so long after the attack on Columbus. But what he didn't realize is that Franz von Papen himself signed the letter of recommendation for Enrile to see the War Department in Germany. And when he went there, he got stuck in Spain and things got delayed. You know, the proposals that Enrile made to the German government were translated by Franz von Papen. And the last sentence says, and if you have any questions, meaning the German government, if you have any questions, contact Franz von Papen. I have the documents. It's amazing. And, you know, so yes, it was delayed, and as a result, Friedrich Katz discarded it. But the people that were believing that Enrile was getting the money, they didn't know it was delayed. You know, and so the attack on Columbus fits perfectly into the timeline of what they intended to do. It doesn't fit into the timeline what actually happened. you know. But this is a significant difference. You always have to look in history of, you know, what did the people know at that time? How did they make their decision from what they knew at that time? At that time, they knew Enrile was in Berlin getting this money. And Pancho Villa was attacking Columbus to make his point that this new coalition is making war on the United States.
So his name, full name was, he was a general?
Gonzalo, colonel, he was a colonel.
Colonel.
Gonzalo C. Enrile.
Enrile?
Enrile. Enrile.
Double L or one?
One L.
Double R.
Double R?
No, one R.
One R.
Enrile.
Enrile.
You know, it's very interesting because this last name, Enrile, I heard this last name, but from Cuban, from the Spanish that
Interesting.
came through Cuba on this.
And I don't know
companies of
about his family
cedar-
background. Yeah,
the
I don't
cedar
know.
companies that came,
Mhm.
the vaudeville, the type of artists that they were complete artists. They sing, they dance, they were very professional.
Mhm.
And really, it's very interesting, this last thing.
And I couldn't tell you whether he really was Mexican. I don't know. He might have been Cuban or Spanish or that. I don't know. I don't know anything about his family.
I never.
But when you research 1912, if you look at 1912, the Orozco uprising,
Orozco.
Enrile is all over the FBI documents because he's the one financing Orozco. He's the one bringing the money from the Terrazas clan.
So
Afterwards, you don't
Now,
see anything about
one thing I have never understood is Orozco at the beginning was against the big ranch, the landholders, because he was a middle-class rancher. He wanted the space to grow and he felt suffocated by the power of the big haciendas.
Yeah.
Why would Luis Terrazas and Orozco get together against Madero later?
Well, I mean, in a sense, Orozco was a traitor. And he was an opportunist. And Terrazas had the most money by all stretches of imagination,
Yes.
That's my opinion. I mean, this is, what motivated Orozco. I mean, some people say Orozco stayed true, he was very popular and he stayed true to his convictions and he took the money from whoever was giving it to him. Could be an argument. But if you really look at the morals behind it, Orozco changed sides and became a traitor to his ideals, in my personal opinion, and he was an opportunist. He took the money from the Terrazas clan because they had a lot. And if somebody else would have given him money, he probably would have taken it too.
And Terrazas gave him money to seek protection for his properties.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So Orozco was really killed on his way to get weapons, or he was being chased?
He was being chased. Orozco got away from, Huerta was arrested, and
Yes.
he was in Fort Bliss. And Orozco got away, and Orozco everybody actually thought he was already in Mexico. Everybody was totally surprised that he was still on the U.S. side. They had raised an army in Mexico. They were ready to fight. And I honestly have never figured out why Orozco didn't go to Mexico. He was hanging out along the border. Maybe he was still trying to get weapons transferred or something like that. But the uprising was supposed to happen on the Mexican side, but he never showed up.
And you believe it was the Justice Department who was after Orozco?
That's what I think, yeah. And I think if there's a book written by the former mayor of El Paso. His name escapes me. Just came out, and I've talked to him. He lives in Oregon. Very nice guy. And it's called The Death of Orozco, The Death of Pascual Orozco. And so he tracks this down, and maybe the posse itself were ranchers and local law enforcement, but the information to go there came from the central government, from the federal government. They were chasing him hard.
But I guess they had a lot of assistance in tracking Orozco by Felix.
Well, Sommerfeld hunted him down for literally years.
Did he kill? I think Sommerfeld was a person that had ideals
Mhm.
on not only in his country but on revolution. His
Yeah.
ideals follow him,
Yes.
and so that's why he he was so disappointed on Orozco's turning his back on Madero.
It was very interesting when Orozco, Orozco after the Madero Revolution, he was very disappointed. Madero
Yeah.
basically took the federal military back into the helm, and Orozco was basically demoted. And ended up, I think, being in charge of the Rurales of Chihuahua.
In
Right? That was-
Chihuahua,
yeah.
yes.
Okay, so he had a minor job, literally. He was his main military commander, and I think he was very bitter about that.
Yes.
And I read a statement from Sommerfeld where Madero sent him to Chihuahua to talk to Orozco and offer him the governorship of Chihuahua.
Ah,
Yeah, because Abraham Gonzalez was actually in Mexico City, which he left. He didn't like his job there. He was part of the government there. And so they were thinking Orozco could take the governorship, and Sommerfeld wrote, "This is a horrible idea. This guy is disloyal. I wouldn't trust him as far as I can throw a stone." And so that was just before Orozco switched sides. And Sommerfeld hunted him down. There's a funny scene in New York City in the Huerta plot. So Federico Stallforth, this Mexican-German
the mine.
that I talked about, he had Orozco come to his office. And while Orozco is in the office, Sommerfeld comes, unannounced, to talk about something with Stallforth. And Stallforth is freaking out. What if these two men meet? Are they going to, kill each other right there in front of me? And so he told Orozco to wait in this one office, and then he told Sommerfeld to, I have something to do, and somehow got him back out of the office. But they almost met. They were literally in the same room.
Interesting. But this Federico is the guy who was a miner in Farral.
Yeah.
So in your studies, which you went too deep, you went almost like a grave digger. What is the essence? What is the result of the Mexican Revolution? Is it a disappointed movement?
No. I mean, my thinking about this whole thing is that any country has to establish a social contract, right? I mean, this is, I think, the United States, Germany. We have these periods of time where the entire population, rich and poor, young and old, generations, they have to agree somehow on a social contract, and that social contract will define what their government will look like. I think maybe we're in part of this discussion right now with our political system here.
Right now we're
Yeah.
going through
And
that.
and so if you look at the Mexican Revolution, my frame of mind is, for example, that it didn't last from 1910 to 1920. I think it lasted way into the 1940s.
Yes.
No, it has lasted into 2016.
And maybe you can even argue that, but the social contract, an agreement
Yes.
of all the Mexicans on what their government's going to look like, was really not established until the 1940s.
Yes.
Right, and then it didn't turn out the way they liked it, I
Yeah,
suppose. So
well.
maybe we're back into a situation where we have to renegotiate the social contract.
Yes.
That's right.
And so that is kind of my frame of mind. What is this Mexican Revolution about? It's really a very violent expression of this thing that happens with all peoples. In certain times of history, they will have to renegotiate their social contract, and sometimes it goes pretty easy. If you look at after the Cold War, you look at countries like the Czech Republic and Slovakia, very easy. You look at Yugoslavia, a disaster. You look at the Arabian countries right now. I mean, think about these Arabian countries. A country like Syria, why is it so violent? What makes people take children and strap bombs on them and send them into a crowd on a market? What has to be happening in a country where this is even possible? You asked people from Arab countries, they don't even know anymore what their social structure is, what their government structure is, what their purpose is in this world. So I think that's kind of my general frame of mind about this whole thing. I think it's this idea of negotiating a social contract among a certain group of peoples.
But in my mind, the Mexican Revolution, with all the fighters, with all the interest, with all the growth that Diaz brought into the country, wouldn't you think that will be enough to continue from that growth and take advantage of that?
Well, I mean, this
And-
is
and
what
at the
Madero
end-
maybe thought. Madero thought, the man is in his 80s. He's going basically going in retirement and somebody has to run the country, I would like to do it. And I
Yes.
will do some necessary reforms. I think that was his initial
Yeah.
thinking, you know, and he published his book in 1908, you know, and then the old man didn't want to give up power. And then the thing got out of hand. And honestly, it got out of hand for Madero too. Madero had no idea this revolution would become this violent and this prolonged, you know. And you know, again, but you know, this rapid industrial development in Mexico, the creation of a middle class that had no political power, but lots of economic power. All these are items that will make a social contract be flawed. Right? The existing social contract didn't fit anymore, and they had to renegotiate it, and it just turned really, really violent.
Very violent.
And at
But I
the
mean,
end-
you know, I often think about what makes these villages. You know, you go to, you know, to these villages that supplied soldiers to Villa and to Orozco and so forth. You know, all the males basically died. And the ones that didn't make it back, as soon as another revolutionary faction would come through, they would be executed because they had fought for the wrong side. And still they sent more people, and they still, Pancho Villa, you know, in 1919, suddenly Villa is back and raising troops and creating trouble. And you really wonder what made these people do this. And it can only be some much higher purpose that you do not keep sacrificing for no reason.
Well,
you know.
the dreams of stopping social injustice, it's what motivates many of these towns even today
Sure,
against the politicians, against their own system.
Sure.
You know, mayors, church.
and you know, if you think about the social contract in Mexico, maybe you can also look at the fact that, you know, okay, so the scientifical class was eliminated, you know, but then you had a single party, and suddenly the party bosses become this new layer of a social layer that suddenly the people below it didn't like that either, you know. But you know, I'm not an ideologue. I mean, this is one thing. You know, Friedrich Katz. I have a real problem with Katz because he was a Marxist, and when you really look at, you know, how he analyzes things, he tries to fit events into a Marxist ideology. You know, the idea that, you know, history progresses in a certain way, and I just simply don't believe that. I'm not bound by ideology. I just want to find as many facts as I can, and then create a small puzzle, and I put all these facts in there, and then I give the book a name, and then you can read it. You know. Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
You're
Really
very
appreciate you
welcome.
coming.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed it
So
very
how
much.
much is the
Well-
new book?
This one is, I think 34 is the, but
About the same as the other one.
but you have a $10 discount because you were there yesterday.
Aha.
Aha.
So,
I'm here to buy a book called,
okay,
and I want you to sign it.
okay. So, they all were here yesterday, so they have a $10. We had these coupons yesterday, there's a $10 discount on this one.
Yes, and I didn't pick up the card. but
Doesn't
maybe-
matter, doesn't matter. They have it here, I think.
Thank you very much.
Did you enjoy it?
Oh, very much, and not only enjoyed it, I learned a lot.
Thank you. Thank you.
So this man is witness. He was born in 1920.
Yeah, yeah,
He's a witness.
yeah,
Almost an entire century. In
Amazing.
4 years, he will have.
yeah. And what a century it was, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think you're quite right. The present situation here is exactly the same thing. The social contract has broken down.
$16 off any book, or just
Any book. Yeah, any of my 4 books.
It's broken down. And
Yeah.
that's why Trump and Bernie Sanders
I think so.
both had
I
the
think so, too. Yeah.
that they had, because they're attacking the
Yeah. The old
status
structure.
quo, the
Yeah,
old structure.
exactly.
And eventually the political parties are going to have to accept that there is a problem and needs to be addressed.
Well, it's
Exactly.
fascinating.
Otherwise,
The-
it might explode on us.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the Republican Party leadership is horrified right now because they don't understand what all these voters
Yes.
are trying to achieve here. You
The
know? I mean, it's-
scientifics don't understand.
That's the word. Absolutely.
Right.